hello, and welcome to episode 20 of Cookie Pocket, an attempt at a podcast. Today we're going to be talking about The Phantom Carriage, a 1921 Swedish ghost film directed by and starring Victor Hörström as David Holm, a man who dies on New Year's Eve and finds himself confronted by the figure of death pulling a carriage, and he must confront all the horrible things that he's done during his terrible, wasted life, basically, during the course of this night. So let's just start as we usually do. Christian, Mitchell, what did you think of the movie?
I was pleasantly surprised.
Okay.
I think it was clearly really well made, and this is one of the movies where I feel hopelessly out of my depth to provide any valid criticism, honestly, because as I'm sure most of our viewers know by this point, I am the most lay person of the three of us, I would say. I think, Zoomer. I mean, Zach being a huge cinephile and going to school for this, and Mitchell having a much broader base of films that he's seen, I think, just generally than I have. I'm kind of a bit in the dark here, but I will say I really loved the score. I thought the ghost effects that they pulled off were really, 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 really cool and actually quite convincing. Like those really held up. It wasn't even necessarily just, this is really impressive for the 20s, but like it looks good. If it came out yesterday, I would say it looked good. Like it really, really holds up in my opinion. So that's incredible, and a great testament to that. Like I think you said in your Twitter review, Zach, the effort put into this film. And I enjoyed it, even though I don't think I really understood a lot of it. I tried, and there's a lot of like blink and you'll miss it type moments. Like if you miss one a slide card where there's some dialogue, you're just like completely lost. I found myself rewinding it a couple times. But overall, I was mostly. It's kind of like a work of art. It's like a really, really, really good painting, where you can't really deny it critically at all. And you're looking at it, and it's beautiful, and it's interesting. And then you keep looking at it, and you keep looking at it. And eventually, to no fault of the art itself, you just kind of lose interest in it or entertainment value from it, I guess, which I think is more of a shortcoming of the viewer than the art itself, and not really a criticism of it. But I think that's why I sort of found myself tuning out, I guess, a little bit as it carried on, but I think it was very well made. The soundtrack was amazing, and I gave it a 3 out of 5.
Okay. Mitchell, what did you think?
I also really liked it, and to be honest, I don't really have too much experience with silent films that much, mainly because like 3 years ago I would have been like, this is boring as hell. Why am I reading? But I had, I guess because I'm older now and I've seen a lot of stuff and I've seen some things. And I think I really adapted to this pretty well. It only took me like 10 minutes probably to get used to the title cards. And I think one thing that I would have liked better that the film couldn't have done really is having subtitles as the film's going, so it wouldn't just cut the title cards. That would be an ideal world, obviously. But I think I really like the every other aspect of the film being silent, because it really relies a lot more on the actors and what they're doing and the facial expressions a lot more than what they're saying and how they deliver their lines. Even though it looks like they actually might be delivering their lines pretty well, I can't tell because they're speaking in Swedish. But I really did like that. It was very unique, and I think a lot of silent films can't really approach that nearly as well as they did in this. And a lot of the cinematography is actually very reminiscent to a lot of like Kubrick and like 70s and 80s films in a lot of ways. And it was really weird. Like I did not feel like a 20s movie most of the time, to be honest. Besides the way that they were dressed and the locations and things like that. But yeah, I mean, the plot I think was really good. It wasn't like a straight line. There was flashbacks and somewhat kind of backstory, I guess, to some of the characters, and it felt very theatrical in a lot of ways. The way that they approached it reminded me a lot of theater. But I really did like most of what was done, especially the effects. I think that's definitely like the biggest thing. But I even like towards the end when they started to hold off on the effects a lot more, maybe I guess like in part 5, I don't know what part it was. It was like the latter third of the movie. But the way that Holm and Edith and Anna were all the way that they were approaching their situations and how much emotion they put into the roles, I think was really, it's very hard to pull that off, especially when you can't hear them. And I think they did a really good job, especially for that time period that they were in. So I gave this film a 4 out of 5. I really liked it for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, not every part of it's going to hold up, and if you can't pay attention the whole time, then you're not going to like the film nearly as much. So,
yeah, wow, I'm pretty jazzed that you guys enjoyed this.
I'm jazzed.
I really loved this. Hey, I really loved this, and I didn't necessarily know that I would going in. I gave this a 4 out of 5, but when I was watching it at the beginning, I thought, okay, this might be like a 3 out of 5 movie. But I recognized somewhere around halfway through the movie that I was crying. And not because anything particularly like sad or happy or emotional was even happening on screen, but just because this movie reminded me on like a really deep emotional level of why I love film and filmmaking in the first place.
Wow.
And that's the effort and the creativity and the real artistry that's put into it. Because, you could say whatever you want about this movie in terms of how it holds up today or in terms of modern audience, but I don't think you can deny that there's a ton of genuine effort and creativity just in every single frame of this movie. And I personally found that really, really moving in a way that I haven't necessarily found a lot of more recent movies that I've watched. So it was a 4 out of 5 for me. I really, really loved it. And I'm glad you guys got something out of it as well.
I'm going to amend my rating to a 5 out of 5. I'm so sorry, Zach.
It was just the violin, Zach. Settle down.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later, actually. But as we've mentioned, this is a silent film. Now, going into this, I had a good deal of experience with silent cinema. Some of my favorite movies are silent movies, actually. But you guys, as you've mentioned, are a bit less experienced with this kind of version of film as an art form. So what did you think of kind of the silent filmmaking style or aesthetic that was expressed through this film? And do you think that it still resonates with modern audiences or has the potential to resonate with modern audiences, or is this something purely left in the past?
I think there's a lot of risk that they had to take in trying to be more emotional and concerning symbolism and morality and having, a lot of literary elements portrayed on screen. Because a lot of silent films at the time were kind of just like zany and in your face and trying to capture the audience's attention a lot. And that cliche definitely holds up. That's definitely a truth. But as far as I know. But I think they took a risk with the audiences at that time. And I think you really have to appreciate, cinema as an art style at that time. And I think that, remains true now. I think if you really don't care, if you don't care about movies as a concept, then you won't care about this movie at all. Honestly, it's like that. Yeah. I think it's that black and white.
Yeah. I pretty much agree. I think I do think that modern audiences would not have the patience for this, but I don't think that's at any fault of the film itself. I really, especially with the mixed to negative feelings I'm guessing the three of us have about our generation at large. Not even getting into the specifics of their
We're talking about
span.
You, listener. Turn it off.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say that I am more hopeful about our generation than I really am, but I mean, I think it's fine that this is sort of more grounded in an academia-esque audience. I think that's a good thing that suits the movie, and I kind of fear that if a larger audience were able to watch it and be entertained by it, that it might lose some of its majesty. So I think that it functions fine as it is, and Mitchell pretty much summed it up perfectly. If you don't care about the intricacies of film, you probably won't have the patience for this.
Yeah. Christian, you said in your Twitter review and also in your kind of your overall thoughts that you had maybe a difficult time keeping track of what was going on. And I really don't blame you for that, because, I mean, this movie is almost a century old. Next year it'll be 100 years old. And it's just a totally different language of visual storytelling. Right. This movie was made at a time when people were kind of figuring out, how do you tell a story with moving pictures? And there's not dialogue or subtitles in this. There's title cards, because the idea of just a voice accompanying a film as it was actually happening was just like, well, why would we do that? Just go to a play, So they're very much kind of breaking in the art form of film, and as a result, the way that ideas are communicated in this kind of a movie are very, very different to something like nowadays. Like if you took somebody from the 20s who grew up on this style of filmmaking and showed them something like Pirates of the Caribbean or an Avengers film, I imagine they would have a hard time keeping track of what was going on in much the same way, because it's just a totally different language of visual storytelling.
Yeah.
I think maybe a good comparison is to something like classical music. Something like Beethoven, Bach. Those older compositions were made with a less advanced musical technology and maybe a less advanced understanding of musical arts. But that doesn't take away from their value, and there's still a genuine beauty and resonance that a modern audience can still find in those. It's similar to this. Now, classical music, silent film, they're not going to appeal to everybody. But then again, what piece of music or what movie is going to appeal to everybody?
Exactly.
I think every example of any art form has like a selective audience. The example for this might be quite a bit of a smaller audience than for a more modern movie, but I do still think there's that modern audience that would still find appeal in this movie. Mm-hmm. Now, Christian and Mitchell, I think you guys both mentioned the musical accompaniment to this movie during your opening thoughts. I should clarify, when these silent films were originally distributed to theaters, they didn't have any set music to accompany them. Basically, they would take the movie to the cinemas, and that would just be the images with the title cards. And then while the movie was being shown in the cinema, there would be an orchestra or an organist or a band at the front of the theater who would play some kind of music along to the film while it was being shown. Now, sometimes there would be sheet music distributed across the nation for like, this is the music you play with the Phantom Carriage. But sometimes the owner of the theater would just say, improvise. And so the musician at the front of the theater would just be doing their own thing throughout the whole film.
That actually would be kind of cool, though.
Yeah, we can't exactly say, though, that the version of the music we listened to was exactly what they would have listened to in 1921. But this is kind of the modern best guess of what it might have been, using similar instruments in a similar style. I should point out for our listeners, the score that we all listened to was the 1998 composition by Matty Bai, which was made to accompany that release that year, and it was with the Criterion release most recently. So, that all being said, what did we think of the musical accompaniment by Matty Bai? Did we think it fit the film? Did we think that it emphasized moments in the film? Did it take us out? What were your thoughts?
I could not tell at all that it was like a recent composition. Like, that was totally on point with the decade, for sure. And all the fast parts were exactly, the fast tempo parts were exactly how I would have wanted it, how I would have expected it to be. All of the slow tempo parts to match the tone and the character expressions and things like that. I think it was very, very well done. I honestly wouldn't change it at all. I think this is definitely, the one that they should go with, the 98 one for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that I could tell that it was a newer composition, so to speak, but now that I'm thinking about it, it's pretty obvious that it had to be, at least just given the quality of the recording itself.
Oh yeah,
it's pretty obvious that it had to have been recorded after the fact. So I mean, and there definitely were times during the film where I was like, wow, this piece is really beautiful, but it's kind of weird that they're playing it during this, or it felt like a similar motif or theme was coming up multiple times. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I thought the music was beautiful. I was basically like, wow, I could just turn the brightness on my laptop down all the way and just close my eyes and I would have just as much fun with this. So I thought it was great. I will say real quick, though, I think on your comment of like classical music versus like newer music, I would say that like composers like Beethoven and Bach are really, to this day, kind of unparalleled in the way that they innovated and also in the way that they compose. And so, and I'm sure you probably have a similar opinion or grasp on many of the things that older filmmakers have done and established. And so I would just say that I think there isn't necessarily a fine line between classical composers and older films and newer musicians and newer films necessarily having better improvements or being better made. And I think that sort of back and forth kind of contributes critically to how well both this music and this film works out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think it has a lot to do with like how they break through with their art kind of like during the time, like who has the largest reach and who has like the most distinct, very unique music or, art in general compared to everyone else. And I think that's what makes it the most, significant. And I think sometimes it's, sometimes it's actually really quality and sometimes it's not. But I think Beethoven and Mozart and, those composers are definitely very quality. And like Christian had said, they're very unparalleled, at least in that genre. And I think in this film, I was going to mention that a lot of the way that certain things are in the 20s, they kind of exaggerate a lot of things. Yes. And in this, obviously you can tell the score is it's not subtle at all. It's a part of the whole film. Yeah. It's in a lot of ways, it's almost bigger than the film itself sometimes. But I kind of like those moments, and it gives character to a lot of the scenes. It makes it very memorable. Like I have like Holmes' expressions and his wife's expressions completely burned in my brain now after seeing them so many times. And it's not like the same expression every time either. It's also very natural. And they kind of just take like one tone every scene and just punch it in your face the entire scene and like really make you want to feel it. So that's definitely a unique strategy, and I really appreciated the way that was done.
And Zach, we're taking you at your word here, as we should. But if you were to tell us that this was the music played in 1921 or whatever, and this was composed specifically for this film, I would totally take you at your word. And most of my comments would be the same. And I will say there is, to some extent, our critical reactions to the music and to films in general are largely dictated by the information we have about the conditions that they're being presented to us. So in that sense, had you told us that it was composed for the film, I'd probably be like, well, I think this was great and really fit the movie well or whatever. And I guess it was composed for the film, but at a later date. So I guess indeed those comments would have been similar. But ultimately, we are kind of taking you at your word, and the historic realization of how those pieces fit together, I think, definitely heavily influences how we critically react to the movie.
Better not be lying to us, boy.
I would definitely say, even though this is a piece that's composed later it's still composed for the movie.
Right.
I don't necessarily think that takes away from its impact, because like I said, it's made using similar instruments and a similar style of the time, and I think it really does fit with the movie. In a lot of cases, I think this is maybe one of the better musical accompaniments that I've heard for silent films. A lot of the time, the musical accompaniment for a silent film is just pure wallpaper. It's something that's there, so you're not just sitting in a dark room listening to absolutely nothing while a picture plays on the wall, but it's not really something that pulls you towards it or really changes your emotion in any way. I think in this film, this musical accompaniment, there are some moments that really impact your emotions and how you feel about the movie. There are character motifs and kind of recurring beats that show up when specific characters or things are on screen. Whenever we see the Phantom Carriage itself, we hear these kind of like really high, squeaky, off-kilter strings that are, at least for me, I found those like very spooky. It really emphasizes kind of how creepy the carriage is meant to be for the people who see it within the story. At a later point in the movie, kind of towards the ending, there's a scene that actually inspired Stanley Kubrick when he was making The Shining. There's a scene where David Holm takes an axe and he's smashing through a door to get to his wife and children on the other side who are trying to leave and run away from him. And we start out with kind of these low horns. They might be trombones, I'm not sure. But then we've got some strings that are added, and then some piano, and then we've got some like flutes, and it just becomes this ramping up, more and more intense kind of a tunnel of almost like discordant noise. And by the end, I think you're really on the edge of your seat. I think that's a scene that really kind of, the music there is a lot of what helps to make it really intense and helps to draw you into the film. So I was definitely a big fan of this. Maybe my favorite musical accompaniment to a silent film that I've seen. I would have to go back and watch and listen to a couple, but this one definitely stuck in my memory in a way that a lot of others have not.
Especially when there was the one scene where he was taking off the patches, and then they basically, the composer basically was like, or I don't know how the terminology. Basically, they were like, take a hammer and just hit every single key on your piano and every single string and just go ape crap on everything. And then I was like, oh, now I remember that scene, even though it was way over exaggerated.
I do really like that scene because it starts with this kind of very subdued, emotional piano piece. And you're sort of like, oh, it's Christmas time, and we're showing kindness towards each other. And then at the apex of the scene, where it should be this emotional, tear-wrenching moment, it's just lean on the piano. Like, it just gets incredibly loud as he's tearing up his jacket. And I think it really, really works. Now, when this movie came out, a big thing that it was sort of acclaimed for, or known for, was its special effects. This movie had a 5-month post-production period, which sounds like nothing nowadays, but in the 1920s, that was a pretty significant period of time to spend on post-production, which was usually just like a week, maybe less, of just stitching your film together, and then that was it. In particular, kind of the big advances that this film made for special effects were the use of multi-dimensional double exposures, which is basically when you have kind of a transparent image on top of a regular image in a film. That technique had been used for previous movies, but it hadn't been done in the way that it is here. In most previous movies, you'd have a transparent thing on top of your regular setting within the movie, and then that would be the only thing on top. In this movie, we have scenes where David Holm and Death, as transparent, ghostly figures, walk into a room, and you can see the wall behind them, but there might be like a cabinet or an object in front of them that obscures them from view at certain points. And to do that, they had to... basically, all the special effects in this movie were achieved by you film something in the background, and then you rewind the camera, and then you film something on top of that, and that's your transparent layer, and then you rewind the camera, and then you film something on top of that, and that's the thing that's in front of it. But additionally, all the cameras on this movie were hand cranked. They hadn't developed motor-operated cameras yet, so you had to have a cameraman on set turning the film to get the exposures. So for the special effects, they had to make sure that all the footage was cranked at exactly the same speed so that it all lined up. So with all that being said, with all the clear effort they put into the effects in this movie, do we think they hold up nowadays, or are at least in some way effective nowadays? Or do we think these are purely dated, don't really hold up at all?
Well, I'm going to tell you the truth, Zach. I probably followed about 50% of what you just said. But I do think that they hold up remarkably well. I think they look better than a lot of junk that has come out in the past decade, honestly. I really, really think that that holds up remarkably. It's kind of like weird illusion here, but it's kind of like at Disney World when you go to the Haunted Mansion and there are these really like spooky ghost effects there, and this is one of the much older kind of legacy rides of Disney back when Walt Disney was still around and they were really like opening up. And to this day, it's probably one of, if not the most convincing things there. It totally reminded me of that, and I honestly found that like the effects of the like the ghost version of the guy like coming out of his body, like I found that more convincing than like I'm sorry, I have to say it, but I found it much more convincing than like a Force Ghost in any Star Wars movie ever. Like it looked way better than any of those ever have to me. And obviously those came decades later. So I was totally sold. And maybe we should go back to analog and this old tech to do movies like this. I don't know. It's interesting.
Doomer movies, yeah. I was paying attention to what Zach was saying. I was reading the text cards on the screen the whole time when Zach was talking. So I really did like the effects a lot. It definitely surprised me. I mean, I knew there was probably going to be ghosts in it because I heard the Phantom Carriage. So there's probably going to be something like that. And I think in a lot, I'm not really sure, but I think at movies during this time, they kind of just assumed they use like props and costumes to make it look like what ghosts were supposed to be and spirits and stuff like that. But I mean, this is like way like decades later. There's still films that have similar techniques that show the exact, or even CGI that look as good or even worse. So I mean, this is what a ghost would look like. Like this is probably what I would think a ghost would look like. So I was not it didn't take me out of the movie at all. I really did. I think it totally paid off. I think it's definitely the best thing the film has going for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you made that Haunted Mansion reference, because thinking about it, the effects in this movie do kind of have a lot in common, at least in terms of appearance or kind of aesthetic, with kind of the look and feel of the ghost on the Haunted Mansion ride. And it's possible, I'm not sure when they first set up Disneyland, Disney World, when they first set up the Haunted Mansion, but it's quite possible that people who helped to develop and build the ride might have seen this film when they were much younger.
Sure,
I mean, they would have been potentially alive at the time, so it's possible this film did influence them and kind of the look of those effects. I do think, I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing to think that the effects in this movie took 5 months, because they were doing everything by hand, when, you know, I can do a similar effect to something like this in like Adobe Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro in like 10 minutes. So I do think in a lot of ways, the real effort of those effects is maybe a little harder to realize nowadays, now that we are so tech savvy and have all this equipment at our fingertips. But I definitely feel that the effects in this movie, they totally fit the aesthetic of the story. These totally fit the feel of kind of an old ghost story that you might tell on New Year's Eve back in the days or something like that. They really feel like in like an older Hollywood movie, if there's like a ghost story on in the background, you feel like it could be this. These are like those sort of vintage, appealing effects that maybe creak a little with age. You can sort of, I feel like they totally convince, but they don't necessarily, you know, pop out and totally catch you. But I do feel that there's something really appealing and charming about them in kind of a vintage way. Now, with that being said, just out of curiosity, has this movie piqued your guys' interest in any other silent cinema? Would you be interested in kind of checking anything else along this style out? Or is this kind of a one done, never take me back type thing?
I'm gonna need Zach to pull me back into some the right films to watch, because I know there's got a lot of films that could waste your time. But yeah, Zach, show me, tell me what I should watch.
I don't know. I really tried on this one, Zach, and I found myself enjoying a lot, as much as I understood. But I really think it is like a fundamentally personal shortcoming that I don't have the attention span for it, and it's at no fault of the art itself, but it's just.
You're just a zoomer.
I'm just a zoomer. I'm terribly sorry, Zach. It just feels like I can recognize that it's beautiful and remarkably impressive for its time period, but it still kind of feels like homework for me, and I don't want my movies to be homework, you know? Even if it's really beautiful and great homework, I still don't want it to be homework.
This might be slightly off topic, but there was in A Christmas Carol, a lot of the later 20th century interpretations of the Ghost of Christmas Future. I like the carriage driver for Death in this as Death more than I do the Christmas Future interpretation, especially the later interpretations of it. And this reminded me a lot of A Christmas Carol in that way. And him saying I failed everything and God hates me and all that other stuff, and then he like wakes up and he's like, oh, I can fix it, that type of thing. That reminded me. I don't know if that film was, I guess it must have been inspired by it a little bit, but I don't know. But I really like that also. Yeah,
this also kind of felt like a much darker version of It's a Wonderful Life in some weird way.
Yeah,
actually.
That too.
Yeah, I think that It's a Wonderful Life, The Phantom Carriage, and A Christmas Carol all have a lot of really fundamental similarities when it comes to story. This idea of somebody who's kind of lost all hope or lost all faith being in some way redeemed through what could be a hallucination, could be a dream, as some sort of divine or otherworldly influence. I feel like there is definitely a lot of similarities. It's interesting you should mention The Ghost of Christmas Future, Mitchell, because in the Robert Zemeckis, Jim Carrey version of A Christmas Carol from like 2009, when Death shows up, he's pulling a carriage very, very similar to the one in this movie.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've only seen that film like twice because I don't like it.
I don't know if that's like a deliberate reference on the behalf of Robert Zemeckis and the animators, and they were like, you know what, we wanna pay homage to the Phantom Carriage, but it's it's certainly possible. Robert Zemeckis is quite the cinephile, and I definitely wouldn't put it past him. I will definitely say I can understand more modern viewers like our own Christian not necessarily being as interested in silent cinema. Like I said, these are very, very old movies. Like, this is going to be a century old next year, like I said. They're almost museum pieces in a lot of ways. There's something you watch more to appreciate, I would say, than to be genuinely pumped up and entertained. But I do enjoy that. One of the things I like about a lot of silent films is they really demand your attention. These aren't the kinds of films that you can, watch while doing, like, your tax returns or fiddle on your phone through half of the movie. You've really got to be into it. You've got to be reading those title cards to understand what's happening. And I do like a more involved story like that sometimes. But all the time, no. I'm not going to say,
Avengers
let's make
Endgame.
only silent films. Like, there's definitely a place for the more modern technology, the more modern sound recording and effects. But I do think they have a lot of very small, similar, fundamental similarities to older silent films like The Phantom Carriage and the way that a movie's set up and the way that a movie's told. And I think it's interesting to see those similarities. But that takes us through all of my notes. So unless we have any final thoughts, I think we can hand it off to Christian for his segment.
4 out of
Alright, then.
5, 4 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 4 out of 5. That's how I feel.
Okay.
And 3 out of 5.
Oh, geez.
I'm sorry.
4 out of 5 for me.
It is a beautiful work of art, but I feel like I'm gonna pull a Zach here. I feel like the criticism has to be at least somewhat subjective to be my criticism. So
You know
for
what?
that reason-
Christian will understand this. If I put less effort into trying to like this than I did in Kirikou. Kirikou was so hard to watch. Zach, you don't even want to know what that is. It was a French thing, and I can't even talk about it. But basically, it was an animation. Okay, it was an relatively older animation. I think it was African made, right? I'm pretty sure it was.
I have no idea.
I don't know. Anyway, everybody was naked, and it was like a kids thing, and there was baobabs and stuff. Anyway, it was not too hard for me to appreciate this. I don't feel like I had to put immense effort into trying to appreciate this a lot. I had to put a lot of effort in appreciating The Usual Suspects more than I did this. That's my bomb.
Wow.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
that's high praise for the
Yeah.
Phantom Carriage.
That's how big brain I am. I'm
Wow.
so open-minded.
Well, while I am overjoyed to hear that, Mitchell, I think that Christian's criticism is totally understandable. I'd recommend this if you're a cinephile. I think if you love movies, then it's a good idea to check out at least some silent films to have an idea where the art form started.
Right.
But if you're not totally on board with it and you don't enjoy it, I don't blame you at all. But if you are a cinephile, if you're into film history, I'd recommend you check out some silent films sometime, and The Phantom Carriage might be a good place to start.
If you're an MCU stan, don't.
Yeah. Or a Star Wars stan. Jesus Christ.
Hey.
Hey!
It's gotten very catty in here.
Yes, I think it's time we advance.
We should go to the
our
rundown
segment.
now.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
the rundown. Cue sound effects. 1 minute. We will essentially quiz Zach on things we have gleaned from the film and formed into a list, and Zach will give us a rating out of 5. Mitchell, are you ready to start us off?
Yeah.
All right. 3, 2, 1, go.
Prolonged facial expressions.
3 out of 5.
Epic orchestral scores.
4 out of 5.
Being collected by Death's carriage after dying in a graveyard.
4 out of 5.
Subtitles.
3 out of 5.
Double exposure.
4 out of 5.
Silent films.
4 out of 5.
Evidently failed Swedish prohibition referendums.
3 out of 5.
The 1920s.
3 out of 5.
Self-contained film saga.
4 out of 5.
Music outweighing the film in majesty.
3 out of 5.
Verlustingsarmeen Slum Station.
4 out of 5.
Unsubbed altercations.
4 out of 5.
God not giving a fig for you, your twaddle.
4 out of 5.
Ghost effects.
4 out of 5.
Here's David.
4 out of 5.
A bunch of drunk men being jerks.
3 out of 5.
Dying at midnight, possibly landing you a nice job.
4 out of 5.
Asking David Holm to attend to a dying person.
2 out of 5.
20's wounds being full of germs.
3 out of 5.
Time. Alrighty.
Did we do them all?
I think we missed one.
Yes,
Ooh,
we did.
shoot.
We got close.
Oh, well. Well, as we wrap up my final episode of hosting for Season 1 of Cookie Pocket and Attempt at a Podcast, I guess I'm going to hand it over to Mitchell to tell us what we're going to be watching and talking about next.
Oh, man. Oh, man. My heart rate's going crazy. I don't know how to say anything. This film. Okay. It's so good. It's going to blow your mind. Zach knows this film more than anyone else. Okay? I'm just going to say it, okay? We are going to watch The Briefcase, directed by Zach Garrigus.
Are you serious?
I am 100% serious. I'm not kidding.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yes. Your world
This is going to
has
be a
been turned
disaster.
upside down. Your world has been turned upside down, Zach.
Excuse me, I have to flee to South America.
I'm not kidding. We're
Oh,
watching
dear.
The Briefcase. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, it'll be a quick watch. If you're interested in hearing us talk about my directorial debut, available on this very YouTube channel,
Yes.
if you're watching this on YouTube, that is, then come back for episode 21 of Cookie Pocket and Attempt at a Podcast. Goodbye and good luck.
Vise, signori.